Today we're going to be looking at part of the life of Jacob. Now, Jacob is a man with an inner emptiness. And because of this, he is desperate. He's desperate for other people's affirmation, other people's approval, for success in the eyes of others. What's so compelling about Jacob is that even though he lived thousands and thousands of years ago, he speaks to the modern condition. You see, as our society gets more and more secular, as our society doesn't believe in God or turns away from him, more and more we are seeing people with God-sized holes in their lives. We see more and more people with an inner emptiness. People with an inner emptiness like Jacob seek to fill that hole by giving themselves over to a hope for one true love. A hope that there is someone or something out there, whether it's a job or a woman or a man, that will give their lives meaning, that will give their lives purpose, that will fix their lives, to give their lives worth, that will fulfill them and make them feel like somehow they belong. If I get that job, then I'll be set. If I marry that woman or if I marry that man, I'll be set. If I have kids, I'll be set. They seek to make good things ultimate things. That job or that career or that money or that fame or that woman or that man or those children will make their lives complete. Over the next couple of weeks, we're going to look at this passage and explore, first, what is behind this overpowering human drive to find a one true love. Number two, the devastation and disillusionment that ordinarily accompanies that search for true love. And then finally, what will ultimately fulfill this longing? What will satisfy this desire? So first, the human drive to find one true love. At the beginning of this passage, Laban says to Jacob, "Just because you are a kinsman or a relative of mine, should you work for me for nothing? Tell me what your wages should be." Now, before continuing on, let's get some backstory here. 2 generations earlier, God comes to Abraham, Jacob's grandfather, and he says, "Abraham, just take a look at this world. Look at the misery and the death and the brokenness. I'm going to do something about that. I'm going to redeem this world, and I'm going to do it through your family, through one of your descendants. And therefore, in every generation of your descendants, one child will bear the messianic line. That child will walk before me and be the head of the clan and pass the true faith on to the next generation. Then there will be another child that bears the messianic line, and another, until one day, one of your descendants will be the Messiah himself, the King of Kings." Abraham fathered Isaac, the first in the line of messianic forebears. And when Isaac's wife, Rebekah, became pregnant with twins, God spoke to Rebekah and said, "The elder will serve the younger." That was God's way of saying that the second twin born would be chosen to carry the messianic hope. Esau was born first, then Jacob. But in spite of the prophecy, Isaac, for whatever reason, set his heart on the oldest boy. He set his heart on Esau and favored him all through his life. And as a result, he distorted his entire family. Esau grew up proud and spoiled and willful, impulsive. Jacob grew up rejected and resentful, and he turned into a schemer. Rebekah favored her younger son and became alienated from her husband, Isaac. Finally, the time came for the aged Isaac to give the blessing to the head of the clan. That was to be Esau. But Jacob dressed up as Esau, went in, and he received the blessing instead. When Esau found out about it, he became determined to kill Jacob. And Jacob had to flee into the wilderness. Now everything was ruined. Jacob's life was ruined. Not only did he no longer have a family to be the head of, he no longer had a family or an inheritance at all. He had to flee for his life. His life was in ruins. He would never fulfill his destiny. Jacob escapes to his mother's family. They take him in as a kind of charity case. Laban, his uncle, allows him to be a shepherd. But Laban soon realizes that Jacob has tremendous ability as a shepherd and as a manager. And he figures he could make a lot of money if Jacob were in charge of his flocks. And that's how we get to this question. How much can I pay you to be in charge of my flocks? Jacob's answer is basically one word: Rachel. I want her. He wanted Rachel as his bride and was willing to work 7 years for her. What do we know about Rachel? The text comes right out and says that Rachel was lovely in form and beautiful. Rachel had a great figure. She had a beautiful face. She was absolutely gorgeous. So what's going on here? Jacob's life was empty. He never had his father's love. He didn't even have his mother's love. And certainly he had no sense of God's love. He had lost everything. No family, no inheritance, no nothing. And then he saw Rachel, the most beautiful woman he had ever seen, the most beautiful woman for miles around. And he said to himself, if I had her, finally something would be right in my lousy life. If I had her, I would finally be somebody. Everybody around here wants her, but I'll be the one who has her. And then people will look up to me, and they'll say, wow, he must be something. Just look at the kind of wife he has. If he found this one true love, his life would finally be okay. He has raised a good thing to an ultimate thing. All the longings of human heart for significance, for security, for meaning, he had no other object for them. They were all fixed on Rachel. This is his hope for one true love. Jacob was somewhat unusual for his time. Cultural historians will tell you that in ancient times, people generally married for love. Pardon me. People, can you turn me down? Pretend you're my date to the prom and turn me down. Okay. Now, Jacob was somewhat unusual for his time. Cultural historians will tell you that back then people didn't usually marry for love. Actually, that's a rather recent phenomenon. They married for status. Nevertheless, it's not rare for today. Ernest Becker, a secular man, an atheist who won a Pulitzer Prize in the 1970s for the book The Denial of Death. In that book, he talks about how secular people deal with the fact that they don't believe in God anymore. He says that one of the main ways secular culture has dealt with the God-sized hole in their lives is through sex and romance. This is what our culture is begging us to do, to load all our deepest needs of our human hearts for significance, security, and transcendence into romance and love to find that one true love. If I have that man, if I have that woman, that'll fix my lousy life. That's what Becker is saying that we do today. And that's exactly what Jacob did. That's what people are doing all over the place today. Have you ever been to a place where everybody looks so cool and pulled together? Maybe it was you're in high school or maybe a nightclub or your workplace or whatever. But that amount of money that people spend on their appearance shows a kind of desperation. They're desperate to attract attention or desperate to keep attention. the human longing of one true love, has always been around. But in our culture now, it's been magnified to an astounding degree. But where does that lead? Disillusionment that comes. Secondly, let's take a look at delusionment and devastation that almost always accompanies the search for that one true love. We begin with Laban's plot. Laban knew that Jacob was to serve 7 years for Rachel. He knew what that meant. At the time, if you wanted to be married, you paid the father of the bride a price. That was somewhere around 35 to 45 shekels. Now keep in mind, a month's wage was equal to 1.5 shekels. Therefore, you can see that Jacob, right off the box, was desperate for Rachel. He immediately offered 3 to 4 times the normal bride price. And then Laban knew that he had him. He knew this man was vulnerable. And notice the conversation between Jacob and Laban. The text says, Jacob loved Rachel. And he said, I will serve you 7 years for your younger daughter Rachel. Now take a look how Laban responds. He never says, sure. He does not say, yes, 7 years is the deal. No. What Laban says is, it's better that I give her to you than I should give her to any other man. Stay with me. Jacob so desperately wants it to be yes that he hears yes. But it's not yes. Laban is just saying, yeah, okay, if you want to marry Rachel, I agree, that's a good idea. 7 years passes. Now Jacob says, give me my wife. As customary, there's a great feast. In the middle of the feast, the bride is brought heavily veiled to the groom. She was given to him, and he took her into a tent. He was inebriated. That was a custom too. And in the dark in the tent, Jacob lay with her. The text says, when morning came, there was Leah. Jacob looked and discovered that he had married Leah. He had sex with Leah. He had consummated the marriage with Leah. And Jacob, quite rightfully, is angry. And he goes to Laban and he says, what is this you have done to me? I served you for Rachel, didn't I? Why have you deceived me? And Laban replies that it's customary for the older girl to be married before the younger girl. And I remember sitting in Mrs. Croft's Sunday school class, reading this story for the first time, and basically saying, why is Jacob saying, okay? I remember thinking that I would have killed him, or at least punched him in the nose really hard. I wouldn't have just meekly said, oh, okay. But now that I'm a bit older, I can see two things that I didn't see when I was younger. First of all, see what Laban says. It's not the custom here to put the younger before the older. And secondly, when Jacob says, why have you deceived me? The word translated deceived is the same Hebrew word that is used in chapter 27 to describe what Jacob did to Isaac. In this instance, all of a sudden, it becomes clear to Jacob. Laban had only done to him what he had done to his father 7 years before. In the dark, when he thought he was touching Rachel, as his father in the dark of his blindness had thought that he was touching Esau. And when Jacob confronts Leah about this and says, I called out Rachel in the dark and you answered, why did you do this to me? And Leah says to him, your father called out Esau in the dark and you answered. Why did you do that to him? All of a sudden, his anger dies on his lips and he's cut to the quick. Suddenly, The evil Jacob has done has hit him square in the face. And he sees it, and he sees what it's like to be manipulated and deceived. And then he meekly picks up and works another 7 years. We leave Jacob in the devastation, and I don't know, I have a better word for it. And then we see what it's done to Leah. Who is Leah? No, she's not the princess from Star Wars. We are told that Leah is the older girl. But the only detail that we are given is that she has weak eyes. That probably means that she's cross-eyed. It could mean that she's unsightly. But here's the point. Leah was particularly unattractive. And she had to live all her life in the shadow of her sister, who was absolutely stunning. As a result, Laban knew that no one was ever going to marry her or offer any money for her. He wondered how he was going to unload this girl. And then he saw his chance. He saw an opening and he did it. And now the girl that Laban, her father, did not want, has been given to a husband who doesn't want her either. She's the girl that nobody wants. And Leah has a hollow in her heart, every bit the size of the hollow that's in Jacob's heart. Now she begins to do to Jacob what Jacob has already done to Rachel and what Isaac has done to Esau. She sets her heart on Jacob. You see the evil and the pathology that these families have? It's just ricocheting around and again from generation to generation. You see, back then, if you were a woman, your status in the eyes of your husband and in the eyes of the community was by bearing sons. The last verse here are some of the saddest words I've ever read in the Bible. Leah gave birth to her first boy, a boy, and she named him Reuben. Reuben means to see. And she thought, now maybe my husband will finally see me. Maybe I won't be invisible anymore. But she had a second son, and she named him Simeon, which has something to do with hearing. Now maybe my husband will finally listen to me. But he didn't. So she had a third son, and she named him Levi, which means to be attached. And she said, maybe, finally, my husband's heart will be attached to me. What is she doing? She is trying to get an identity through traditional family values. Having sons, especially in those days, was the best way to do that. But it wasn't working. She set her heart on saying, if I only have a son, Jacob will love me. If I only have a son, the people in this community will finally see me as being the best. Finally, my husband will see me. Finally, my husband will listen to me. Finally, my husband will attach his heart to me. If I have babies, and if I have sons, my husband will love me. Then finally something will be fixed in my lousy life. Instead, she was just going down into a hell. And this text says, it's a sort of a summary statement. Jacob loved Rachel more than Leah. That meant that this poor girl was condemned every single day. And that's what I meant by a hell. Every single day she was condemned to see the man that she most longed for in the arms of the one whose shadow she had always lived her life in. every day was like another knife in this poor woman's heart. All we see here is devastation. No, that is actually not the way the text ends. But before we look how the text ends, let me field a couple of objections and perhaps a couple of lessons. The first objection has to do with these ancient practices. I remember when I was in seminary, a lot of the female students were quite against this text, saying that thank goodness we don't live in a culture where a woman's value is based on her looks. Thank goodness we don't live in a culture where a woman looks in the mirror and says, look at me, I'm a size 4, I can get a rich husband. Well, quite frankly, that's what I see when I look in this culture. And I guess perhaps I shouldn't be sarcastic. But what in the world makes you think that we are any less brutal a culture now than back then? Besides, what the Bible says about the human heart is always true and abiding. If anything, what we are saying here today is truer today than it was back in Jacob's time. The second objection people have to this text is that people say, well, where are the spiritual heroes in this text? Who am I supposed to be emulating? Who's the good guy here? What's the moral of the story? I don't see any. And the answer is you're absolutely correct. And if you say that, you're starting to get it. You're starting to get the point of the Bible. What do I mean? The Bible doesn't give us a God at the top of the moral ladder saying, look at the people who have found God through their great performance and moral record. Be like them. Of course not. Instead, over and over again, the Bible gives us weak people who don't seek the grace that they need, who don't deserve the grace that they get, and they don't appreciate it after they get it, and continue to screw up and abuse it even after they have it. And yet, the grace of God keeps coming. The Bible is not about a God who gives us accounts of moral heroes. It's about grace. That is what our God story is all about. So what do we learn from this story? Is there any moral? I wouldn't put it that way. But I would say that there's two things I want you to see. First, we learn that through all of life, there runs a ground note of cosmic disappointment. You're never going to leave a wise life, no matter who you are, unless you understand that. Here's Jacob, and he says, if I can just get Rachel, everything will be okay. And he goes to bed with someone he thinks is Rachel. And then literally, the Hebrew says, but in the morning, behold, it was Leah. But I want you to know that when you get married, no matter how great you think that marriage is going to be, when you get that career, no matter how great you think that career is going to be, when you become famous, no matter how much you think that fame is going to be, finally make you happy, in the morning, it's always going to be Leah. Most people, if they have really learned to look into their own hearts, would know that what they want, and what they want acutely, is something that can't be had in this world. It's something that no amount of money, no amount of fame, no amount of physical success can give you. If you get married and you do it the way that Jacob does, and put that kind of weight on a person that you're marrying, or you do it and you put the same kind of weight that Leah is putting on Jacob, you're going to crush him or her. You're going to kill them. There is no way that they're going to be able to live up to your ideals. You may think that you go to bed with Rachel, but when you get up, behold, it's Leah. And as time goes on, Eventually, you're going to know that this is the case, that everything disappoints, that there is a note of cosmic disappointment and disillusionment in everything and in all things into which we have put our hopes. And when you finally find that out, there are 4 things that you can do. 1, you can blame the things and drop them and walk away and find new ones. Okay, you really were Leah, but perhaps there's another Rachel just around the corner. I'll leave you alone and go off to pursue another one. That's the fool's way. The second thing you can do is blame yourself and beat yourself up. I've been a failure all my life. I see everybody else is happy. I don't know why I'm not happy. There must be something wrong with me. In other words, you blame yourself and become a self-hater. Third, you can blame the world and get cynical and hard. You can say, curse on the entire opposite sex, or whatever. I'm going to walk away from that business. I'm never going to do it again. I'm going to walk away from women, or I'm going to walk away from men. I'm never ever going to have anything to do with them again. They hurt me once, they're not going to get a second chance. In which case, you dehumanize yourself. Or lastly, you again, as C.S. Lewis says in the end of his great chapter on hope, you can change the focus of your life. And he concludes, if I find myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world, and that perhaps something greater than this world is the only thing that can satisfy this hunger. How do we go about changing the entire focus of our lives? Come back next week, and I'll tell you. To which I can only say, thanks be to God, and amen.